you so much. The title got much longer in the peer review process of the abstract for the conference. The short version is Noble and Novice, author, prominence effects, peer review. And that's what I'm going to tell you all about. This is joint work with my colleagues from Innsbruck, Graz, and Chapman University. So this is a randomized control trial, which was inspired by this quote from Merton from 1968, when he wrote, "Eminent scientists get disproportionately great credit for their contributions to science, while relatively unknown scientists tend to get disproportionately little credit for comparable contributions." So in this project, we asked two big research questions. The first one is whether author prominence affects reviewers' likelihood to accept the review invitation. And the second one is whether author prominence affects the reviewer's evaluations or assessments of the manuscript quality in the subsequent step. So we're looking at status bias in accepting review invitations and in manuscript assessments. Now, let me give you a very high-level overview of the experiment or RCT that we conducted. First of all, we work with a single manuscript, which was jointly written by a very prominent and a rather unknown author. Then we submitted this to a journal and invited many, many reviewers in different treatment conditions that I'm going to talk about more later. And then we basically just measured the acceptance rates of the review invitations in these different treatments. And we will compare the recommendations to reject, revise, or accept the manuscript across the different conditions. Let me introduce to you the two authors that we worked with for the manuscript here. And the highly prominent researcher that we were able to acquire for this project is Vernon L. Smith. Vernon Smith is the 2002 laureate of the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences. And at the end of last year, he had about 54,000 Google Scholar citations. So this will be the researcher we use to identify any positive status bias. The relatively less prominent researcher is Sabio Inoue, and he's an early career research associate and a former PhD student of Vernon Smith. That's why they have a paper together. And at the same time last year, he had 42 Google Scholar citations. Both were at the time of the study affiliated with Chapman University, so we can hold the affiliation constant here. Some more details on the other aspects. First, about the manuscript. It's original work that they actually wrote on asset markets for retradable assets. It's a very substantial paper, 54 pages long. It has some literature review, theory, some simulations, some empirical stock market analysis and experimental data. So we believe it's quite suitable for a very diverse set of reviewers and therefore also usable for our study. We work together with the Journal of Behavioral and Experimental Finance, which is an Elsevier journal, and we would like to thank Elsevier for helping us with this project. At the journal, that's uncommon for many other fields, reviewers are paid $50 for the reports that they submit. So this is a token of appreciation, not a payment, I'd say. It's a relatively young journal. It was founded in 2013, I believe, and it received its first impact factor earlier this year. 8.2 does not sound much in some fields, but in finance, it's enough to rank 5th out of 111 in the finance category or in the Web of Science. And then for our pool of researchers, we collected over 5,500 researchers who had published in journals that would be suitable for this manuscript over the past years before the actual study. And we believe that they might be suitable to assess the quality of this manuscript. Okay. Now, to answer our first research question about the willingness to review a paper, what we did was the following. We invited the reviewers, telling them the title of the manuscript and the abstract, and nothing else in the anonymous condition, which is, well, has this A here for anonymized condition, right? They only knew the title and the abstract and could accept or decline the invitation to review this paper. And in two treatment conditions, we told them in the invitation, well, the corresponding author is either Sabio Inoue in the low prominence condition, or in the high prominence condition, we told them the corresponding author is Vernon Smith. And we did not tell them about the second author on the paper. So we only revealed one author and designated them the corresponding author. And now basically we invited 3,300 people to review this manuscript and looked at what happened, right? And there's a lot of data on this slide, but what is the important aspect is that in the anonymized condition, when they did not know who wrote the paper, who was the corresponding author, about 30% accepted the review invitation. When in the low treatment and low prominence treatment, it was 29%. This difference is not statistically significant. And in the high prominence condition, we have an acceptance rate of over 38%, which is statistically significantly different from the other two conditions. So we interpret this as clear evidence of a positive status bias in the willingness to review the paper by this corresponding author. That's the first research question. Now let's move on to the second one. But before that, I have to tell you something else. What happens to those people that click the accept link who want to review this paper? Well, so far they didn't know they were part of a study, but now we told them. We took them to a separate website where we told them that their report, if they were to provide one, would be part of the usual peer review process, would inform the editor's decision, but it would also be part of the study on the peer review process. We did not reveal the research question, but we told them that more than the usual number of reviewers, 2 or 3, would be invited for the study. Well, I mean, we told them that, right? We wanted them to know. And we made them accept or decline once more, whether they really wanted to be part of the study, because it takes quite some time to review a paper, of course. At this stage, about 81% still accepted to be part of the study, so we lost about 19%. But luckily, there are no differences across the treatment conditions. So whether they knew from the initial invitation it was Savio, Vernon, or nobody, didn't make a difference. And then they proceeded to the manuscript download and would have the usual 30 days to provide a review and so on. In the end, 534 reports for the identical manuscript were submitted. And this is the basis for the analysis for the second research question. And in the second stage, we only look at those reports for now that were in the following 3 conditions on the bottom here, AL, AA, and AH. So we only look at those that received initially an anonymized invitation. So they're all equal to this stage. But then they saw a manuscript either with no author information, with Savio Noah, or with Vernon Smith, right? It was fully between subject. And we compared these 3 conditions now. Well, here are the results for the second question. This graph shows you the distribution of recommendations that the reviewers gave in the 3 conditions. AL is low prominence, AA is anonymous, AH is high prominence, and the orange on the left is the reject recommendations, the rest are the others. We see in the anonymous condition, about 48% of the reviewers recommended to reject this paper. When they knew it was written by Savio and Noah, or he was the corresponding author, that increased to 65%. But when they knew this paper was the corresponding author was Vernon Smith, the high prominence author, it dropped to 22.5%. And it's not just at the bottom end of the distribution that we see the change, we see it across the board. If we look at the dark blue, for example, that's the accept recommendations. Typically 2% of the reviewers in the anonymized condition and the low prominence condition suggested to accept the paper outright, which is very uncommon. 20.6% recommended to accept the paper outright if it carried the high prominence name. And this is an identical manuscript, identical words. So we interpret this as clear evidence of positive and negative status bias in manuscript evaluation here. Well, and let me conclude by saying we are certainly not the first to study status bias in peer review, but we believe to have run one of the cleanest studies of status bias in peer review to date. We find clear evidence of status bias, positive in invitations and positive and negative for manuscript evaluations. And if taken at face value, our results support strict double anonymization in the review process. But, big but, because this is unrealistic in our opinion. We believe that it's so easy nowadays to look for the authors of a paper because papers are presented at conferences, they are published on preprint servers, that we can't really stand behind the call to say we should double anonymize anything. It's probably just not very effective. We rather encourage the community to explore alternatives, right? So how about non-anonymized peer review? This is something we did not test in this study. And maybe we could also explore ways to facilitate more channels of communication between reviewers and authors to discuss about issues and to find solutions together. To give you a very quick outlook, and the very first moments of, or very last moments of my talk is, we want to follow up on this project by looking deeply into the contents of the reports that we have for this identity manuscript, but that's future work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, questions are coming, I think.
Not
Okay.
Sure.
Stuart Taylor from the Royal Society in London. Thank you very much. This is very interesting. I'm sure that we all kind of instinctively knew that this was happening. I kind of agree with your conclusion that double blinding is probably not realistic, but I wonder whether it's actually potentially worse than that, in that if you try and anonymize, you might actually make it easier for the high status authors to be discovered. So you might actually make the problem worse. What do you think?
Did I get that correctly? That you think by anonymizing, we might make it easier?
What I'm saying is that anonymization is very difficult to do because it's quite easy often to tell who the author is, right?
Yes.
And it might actually be easier to tell in the case of a high status author. So you might actually end up doing the opposite of what you attempt. Is that reasonable?
I see. Yeah.
It's just a thought.
Yeah.
Anyway, I agree.
Well, I mean, from the top of my head, I could see that happening, right? I mean, I don't have any data to speak to that. I have to be very careful, but yeah, I think that's a problem, and I think that's one of the many issues in this area and in this field, and that we should discuss and find solutions to. Thank you for raising it.
Thanks. We go to the microphone in the back and then to virtual questions.
Denise Goodman, Chicago. First, congratulations. That is a fabulously clean study, and you have one of the most profound data sets now for peer review with over 500 reviews. And according to your last one, you're going to look at the content, which reflects the other speakers this morning. Do you have other a priori questions? For instance, the seniority of the reviewers themselves, a sort of 6 degrees of separation approach about research networks and what their prior relationships might have been, acolytes of one of the authors, et cetera. Do you have some of those other questions in mind?
Thank you, first of all, for the kind words. We do have some information about the reviewers here that took part in this. We have some information from Google Scholar, citation, seniority in the publication process. And I think we can control for all of these that they don't change the results. Looking further at the questions regarding the content, we will have to, I want to study these kinds of questions, but it will be hard because of the very strict data protection issues and concerns, because we can't really have any of our reviewers being identified. So we have already boiled down the data set into, in terms of these characteristics, into categorizations and bins, so that you cannot, from like looking at how many citations somebody had, re-identify the reviewer. But I'm open to exploring any ways to analyze the texts themselves. And I welcome anybody who would like to approach me with ideas about that.
Okay, Michael, with the questions from the virtual audience.
Thank you very much. Sarah Schroeder from the BMJ asks if you, to what extent the findings, can you speculate that the findings are replicable beyond this one test paper or generalizable beyond the 2 named authors? And Gerben Turiet of Amsterdam University wants you to comment on all of the effects we've heard about in terms of peer review, herding bias, citation bias, status bias, and your findings and how that all comes together in terms of peer review decisions.
Okay, big questions. Let's start with the first one. Say again, the first one. Sorry.
The first one is the replicability
Oh, the
beyond the
replicability.
one test
Yeah.
paper and the generalizability between the 2, beyond the 2 authors.
Sure. So first of all, yes, we have a stimulus sampling problem. We have just one manuscript that we send out, and well, it could be something special about this paper. We cannot rule this out. I cannot test this. Secondly, it's just one field that we tried this in. We're very happy, and I think we even write in our current working paper version that we invite anybody to replicate the study, although it will be tough. So My personal hunch is that it will be very similar, because from speaking with most people, also from different fields, is that they all have the feeling, oh yes, the author prominence probably affects the evaluation of the manuscripts and how easy it is to find reviewers, but I don't have any data to back this up. And I welcome any efforts, and that's why we try to make as much of this openly available in the future. Second one, bringing it all together. Yes, we just singled out one component, and through the randomization, we hope to hold all the others constant or at least controllable. But yeah, I only tested this one thing.
Okay, thanks. Thanks. The question in the back and then Vivian in front.
Very elegant work. Congratulations. This is maybe more of a comment, but I was thinking if you could cull those reviewers in the low status, initially anonymous one, and turn them into the mentors in the other program, and perhaps design some web-based peer-reviewed training, we have identified some people who are less biased than the rest of the group, and we could learn from them.
Thank you for this comment. I'm sure the reviewers would be very happy if we give them additional work. No, but seriously, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian.
Yes, Vivian Bachelet from Santiago, Chile. Yeah, I also enjoyed your work, so I adhere to the words that were said before. I think that status bias fits smoothly also with geographical bias. So that's something that maybe we would all want to look into at one point or another. You know, if you're submitting from third world countries or whatever vis-a-vis first world, then there might also be reviewer bias involved. But my question actually is regarding what is the likelihood that the manuscript could have been identified by the reviewers? Because from what I know in your discipline and in economics in general, they have this thing of the works in progress, you know, or whatever. So maybe it can be just Googled and found easily.
Thank you for both comments. The easy one first. The easy one is because we approached Merton and Sabio very early in the process, this manuscript was never published online. It was never presented online before all of the data collection for this study had been completed. So we made sure that this cannot be a confounding factor in this study. However, yes, it's true, most other papers are presented somewhere or published before. The second thing is, yes, this could also have to do with geographical reasons. And there's also one limitation that I should probably point out. If you haven't noticed, there's Vernon Smith is an American sounding name. He's also a white-skinned person. So Sabio Onoa is neither. Sabio Onoa is dark-skinned, and the name also does not sound very white American, I'd say, right? There's a difference there. We cannot control for this factor, so the results could also be driven by discrimination, potentially. And I think it's plausible that it also works with different regions of the world, for example.
What I'm saying is that this type of study should also be done to identify geographical bias. So I'd like to pick up on what you're doing.
Okay, question here on the left side.
Hi, I'm Manolis Antoniogiannakis from the American Physical Society. Thank you very much. Very interesting analysis and very impressive and clear data. I would like to push back a little bit on the notion that this bias is necessarily bad, because when scientists go throughout their career, they build credit based on their prior work. And this credit is used then often by the community, by editors, by funders, by conference organizers in order to give them more lenience or to give them a more prominent space. And that is not necessarily bad. So to give you an extreme example, say from physics, if we receive the same paper claiming something really extraordinary, say room temperature superconductivity, by a completely unknown group somewhere and by a very prominent group, of course, it would be more likely that we would err on the side of acceptance in the more prominent group. And that is legitimate, that is fine, I would claim. Because often when you in peer review, there is an element of trust you have to, especially for more and more important and bolder proposals. So what is your feeling about this?
Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely it's a tough question, right? So I believe that, that's my personal belief though, that identical work should not be valued differently depending on who wrote it, because that makes it especially hard for younger and unknown researchers to get their foot in the door in the academic process unless they can publish with their maybe more prestigious superiors or supervisors. And I think we want the best quality research published, irrespective of who found it or who wrote it or who developed it. But I do see the point, and I fully acknowledge that there's always some benefit of the doubt. Also, reviewers might be more likely to accept work from a well-known person because I think, well, he's been doing that for years. That might be less work for me to review. Maybe he's better at what he's doing, or it's more interesting at what their perspective are on the issue. So I do see that that's a common part of peer review, but I would like to, like personally, I would like to see that minimized.
Very quick question, the last one. Quick question, quick answer.
Thank you very much for your wonderful work. I would disagree with this as a physicist because I think, like, essentially the work, the evidence needs to actually, like, address all concerns, regardless of, like, if they're young, old, or, like, whatever other status. Now I forgot the question, but I think that's great because you guys can move on.
Thank you so much, Wolfgang.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It would be interesting to see what happens with the other two arms of your trial.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.